Adolf Hitler was the infamous Nazi dictator who oversaw one of the most horrific periods in human history. His reign of terror saw millions of people lose their lives, including 6 million Jews who were systematically murdered in concentration camps across Europe. However, despite his notoriety, the final resting place of Hitler's body remains shrouded in mystery. It was 1945, and the end was near for the Nazi regime. The Soviet Red Army was closing in on Berlin from the east, having liberated Poland. Meanwhile, the Allied forces of Britain, the United States, and their allies were advancing from the west. Hitler was increasingly paranoid and had retreated to his bunker, an air raid shelter in Berlin. As the Soviet forces approached the city, Hitler's closest allies began to surrender or jockey for position. Hitler was determined not to be taken alive. He planned to end his life, along with his longtime mistress Eva Braun, rather than face capture and trial. Hitler obtained capsules of poison from Heinrich Himmler, but he was unsure if they would be effective or if they were another betrayal. Instead, he gave them to his beloved dog Blondie, who died immediately. Hitler then retreated to his room with Eva Braun and prepared for the end. What happened next has been the subject of much debate for nearly 8 decades. According to witnesses in the bunker, Hitler's valet entered the chamber and immediately smelled gunpowder and a strange burnt almond smell. Hitler and Braun were dead. Braun apparently died from poisoning, as she had no visible wounds, while Hitler was bleeding from a fresh wound to his temple and had a gun at his feet. It appeared that the Nazi leader and his new wife were serious about not being taken alive. As soon as the news broke, the Nazi leaders knew Hitler's body would be of great interest to the Allies, and they did not want them to get a hold of it. Led by the acting Nazi leader, Joseph Goebbels, the Nazis on site rolled the bodies up in a rug, gathered papers covered in petrol, and set the entire thing on fire. This took place amid heavy Allied shelling of the area, which shows just how loyal Hitler's diehards were. They were willing to carry out these bizarre funeral rites even as their own lives were endangered. While Hitler's body was not totally destroyed by the burning, it was now unrecognizable and buried in a bomb crater along with the rug soaked with his blood. Soon after, the Soviets took control of Berlin, and the news that Hitler was already dead did not make Stalin happy. As word spread of Hitler's death, millions of German troops left the battlefield to avoid the Soviet forces. It would be several days before the Soviets arrived at the compound, and they dug up what is believed to be Hitler and Braun's dental remains. A cursory analysis identified Hitler's body, which seemed to put things to rest. But Stalin had other ideas. He did not believe that the dental remains were conclusive evidence that Hitler was dead. It just seemed too easy, didn't it? Hitler had terrorized the continent and beyond for 12 years, and now he was dead with no way to hold him accountable for his crimes. That sounded like exactly what he would want them to think. Many Soviet operations in the area continued to dig up the bodies of the Nazi leadership, but it's not clear if they found any more of Hitler's body beyond what was believed to be his teeth. And without more proof, Stalin refused to believe his nemesis was truly gone. There have been several different accounts of what happened to Hitler's body following his death. In the years after the war, rumors circulated that Hitler had escaped and was living in hiding somewhere. Some even claimed to have seen him or had evidence of his continued existence. However, most historians and researchers believe that Hitler did in fact die in the bunker in April 1945. The evidence suggests that his body was then taken by Soviet troops and transported to Moscow, where it was examined and photographed. The Soviets initially claimed to have buried the remains in a secret location, but later admitted that they had cremated the body and disposed of the ashes. For many years, the fate of Hitler's remains remained a mystery. However, in the 1990s, a fragment of skull that was believed to have belonged to Hitler was discovered in the Russian state archives. DNA analysis confirmed that the skull fragment was genuine and that it did indeed belong to Hitler. Despite this evidence, some conspiracy theories continued to circulate about Hitler's death and the fate of his remains. Some believe that the skull fragment is a fake, or that it was planted by the Soviets to cover up the fact that Hitler escaped. Others claim that Hitler's body was secretly transported out of Berlin and buried in an unknown location. Overall, while the exact details of what happened to Adolf Hitler's body after his death may never be fully known, the evidence suggests that his remains were disposed of by the Soviets, and that he did not survive the war. The story of Hitler's rise to power and the atrocities committed by the Nazi regime remain a haunting reminder of the dangers of hatred and extremism.